Good afternoon, everyone. How is everybody? I'm going to try to speak up. This room has a little bit of an echo, so if you guys can't hear me, you get to throw things at me, right? That'll tell me that, hey, speak up or get the heck out because we're tired of hearing what you're talking about. There? Okay. So how many of you guys are here because you were told to be? See, we're already starting off well. How many of you were told to be here and didn't raise your hand? Oh, nobody wanted to fall for that one. Okay. All right, well, you guys are already ahead of the game. So have you guys ever gone through an anti-fraud training before? Anybody? No? How many have experienced any type of fraud in the workplace? A few of you? Okay. So what we're going to do today is we're just going to kind of talk about some different types of things that occur. I mean, let's be real. I don't know about how many of you guys pay attention to the news or watch, whatever's going on in social media, because it's all real when you see it, right? So, we want to believe everything. But, unfortunately, our society seems to have a little bit of a challenge when it comes to the ethical barometer, and we're starting to see I am staying busier. Chief, I'm sure, is probably staying a lot busier and things just because we're seeing a lot more good people make some poor choices and do some things that they probably shouldn't do that's causing organizations, companies, things like that, a lot of financial loss. So what I do in my role with my company is, and as Tanya said, my background's ex-law enforcement, went into corporate America and did investigations through various types of large organizations. And then I started my own firm back in 2009, and I work with a lot of small businesses and local municipalities around fraud prevention, fraud investigations, and then I'm also an expert witness in the civil court side, dealing with other types of forensic accounting things. So I see a lot of different things, and just when I think I've seen it all, somebody surprises me with a new scheme, right? So I'm always learning, so that's the only good thing about that part. But what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some of the things that we see in fraud when it comes to municipalities and government. What's important and what I'm hoping you take away from today is not that everybody in this room is I'm just going to call it a fraudster, because that's not the case. But we do see sometimes good people have things that come up in their life, stresses, divorces, family illnesses that put them in a financial corner, and they rely on where they can get funds, okay? And so sometimes it's the workplace. And the thing is this training is geared to hopefully just help everybody to keep everybody honest. And if something happens, then you know what to do. Fair enough? Now, I don't talk the whole time, believe it or not. I know you're here for a presentation. So I want this to be interactive. If you guys have questions, throw it out at me. I'm going to ask questions. If you don't answer, I'm going to come pick on you. Chief already said I could pick on him today, so we're good. All right. So anyway, I want this. You guys need to get information from this. I do this all the time. So this is your presentation, so make sure you ask questions, okay? So how many of you think if somebody, just by a show of hands, do you think most people would get away with something if they thought they wouldn't be caught? Just raise your hand. Okay. What about 50% of people? Do you think 50% of people would get away with something if they feel like they wouldn't get caught? Okay. What about 70%? No? Okay. You guys are a lot more trusting than most. What I would say, and I just want to get a temperature check, kind of feel of what is your perception of who would do something, who could do something, right? I think most of us innately want to be trusting, and that's actually a good thing. But what I tell people is trust but verify, okay? And I'm going to apologize, guys. I'm trying to talk close to you so you can hear me, but also see the computer. Actually, we're going to do this, since this moves, so I can see what I'm talking about. All right. So when we talk about employee fraud, and I don't know if you guys can see that up there. On average, I'd say the median loss for employee fraud in government, municipalities, I kind of tried to hone in on more local versus state and federal. And when we started looking at some of the statistics, it's about the median loss is about $150,000. I don't know about you guys, but that's one nice heck of a vacation, or down payment for a nice lake house or something. 150,000 for some may seem like whatever. We've got millions or billions of dollars running through our public funds. It's a piece of cake that that's just a drop in a hat. The reality is, as we get into this conversation, that loss is always a lot higher. Okay, so this is just what they call the median loss. When we talk about fraud, fraud always has a behavior element, some type of psychological behavior element that's tied to it. Okay, fraud doesn't just happen without somebody, and we're going to talk a lot about the psychological traits that lead to somebody making a choice to commit fraud. And then understanding what those red signs is why we're here today, so that you can have, hopefully a little bit more knowledge and things to look at. I always reference it like taking the blinders off, right? We walk around every single day, and we get so caught up into our routines, and we do this, that we forget about what's going on in our peripheral vision. Well, hopefully some of this will help take those blinders off, so that as things do start to happen, if you see red flags, you kind of can call it out earlier, that hopefully we can change the behavior or stop it so it doesn't impact all of you, and we'll talk about that in a presentation. So when we look at fraud, there's 3 different types of classifications that most fraud schemes fall into, okay? There's actually about 51 fraud schemes on average, at least right now, until somebody else decides to add another one to the classifications. So you've got asset misappropriations. Anybody want to take a shot at what they think would fall under that? What type of fraud would fall under an asset misappropriation?
Using it for something else than what it's meant for.
Yes, but can you be a little bit more specific? Like what type of fraud would occur?
Taking from a fund that's put together to, I don't know, say raise money for something, and then people who are in charge of the money end up keeping it or doing things with it.
Okay, so how would they do that?
When they're in charge of the money and nobody else is.
Right, but okay, so they're writing a check to themselves?
Yes.
Okay, so that's where I'm trying to pull from you, right?
Gotcha.
So you could have something like a check fraud scheme, okay? Good. What else?
Like taking a backhoe home and digging your own hole.
Yep, so take inventory of some sort, right? Or a company asset actually physically removing the product. My auditor friend, what else? That was their fault. They told me to pick on you.
You guys are in trouble.
Really, any sort of, if you take money out of a cash register, you're stealing the funds directly, or you're just using a credit card to
Okay, good.
personal purchase, or to pay your own utility bills or something like that, maybe.
Excellent. So he's talked about a couple of things there. So you've got taking cash out of a register. That's what they call a skimming scheme. Usually you take the cash off the top before it ever hits the books, right? Talked about expense fraud, using a company credit card or a procurement card, a P card, and then going and buying all kinds of things on, I could tell you story after story, folks, of cases I've personally worked where there is usually an element of some type of expense fraud. Things like check fraud or payroll fraud, where you've got somebody that's a ghost employee, and you've got, sorry Tanya and team, in the HR side, somebody in the HR side who's decided that they're going to create an extra employee and pay themselves another payroll, so now they get 2 paychecks every pay period instead of 1, because that ghost employee on the books nobody's paying attention to, right? So these are types of fraud schemes that fall under the asset misappropriation. Financial statement fraud is what? Someone to pick on the finance team.
Isn't that where if someone's going to earn information because they bring in more revenue, so they cook the books and say they make more revenue so they can get a bonus?
Yes, a lot of it is so they'll change, they'll alter financial statements for bank loans, for performance-related issues, for grant reporting, right? You're trying to obtain grants, so you make the books look better, the invoicing and the receivables look better than they really are to obtain large grants. So that would be financial statement fraud. The other one that we see a ton of in the government sector is corruption fraud schemes. And I'm going to tell you right now, folks, I am personally seeing a ton of those on the rise. I used to deal with that every now and then, and now I'm getting involved in a lot more of those cases. Anybody know what I mean by a corruption scheme, Chief?
I have no clue. I'm just here to watch body language and see who's scoring.
Well, then you need to be sitting up there so you can. Anybody?
Bribery.
Good.
Someone that could potentially be coerced from someone from the outside, blackmailing.
Yep. So, and you said, yeah, bribery, bid rigging. Where's my procurement people? Any procurement folks in here?
Under finance.
Under finance, okay, right. So you have contracts, you're going out to contract, you've got multiple vendors that you're working with, but you like one vendor in particular because they keep, helping you to support your Lake of the Ozark habits with your boats and all of the other, nice condo that you have out there, and so they get the contract all the time. So those would fall under the corruption fraud schemes. Good stuff. So some of the more common fraud schemes that we see in actual government, municipalities include, which we talked about, grant fraud, where somebody's applying for, let's say it's a $500,000 grant, but really their budget can only support $200,000. So what do? They start making up bogus invoices and things, or revenues or financials to make sure that they can justify the ask. Expense fraud, which we talked about with like company credit cards, things like that. I just got done working a case where the employee took lots of liberties with a company credit card and was buying nice vacations, going out supporting the girlfriend's, lifestyle. They were married, not for long, but, have a very nice boat, and all this stuff was being paid for by the company, and the company organization never even paid attention to it until it was too late. And we're not talking like $50,000 or $58,000 like this says. A lot of my expense fraud cases tend to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I've had some in the millions. Payroll fraud, which we talked a little bit about already. A billing scheme. Anybody know what a billing scheme is?
Is that where you're creating a false vendor and sending bills out? Excellent,
yes. Yep. Has anybody ever been in a situation or worked any place where that's occurred that you know of? So what happens, usually a company will and usually it's in the accounting department, although I've seen other departments that will do this. If you have some departments that kind of wear multiple hats, and they will go set up their own fictitious company. They then start funneling money through various sources to this entity that they have access to. And those types of schemes, usually I've had several that ran in the millions of dollar range for those. Because what happens with fraud is it will go on, it's rare that you catch fraud right away. More times than not, it'll go on for years and years and years. What we find is if you catch fraud early on, the fraud loss is low. So the longer it goes on, the higher the loss, right? Procurement and contract fraud, we talked a little bit about already. And then the financial statement fraud. These are the main ones that we see in a government entity. Okay. You guys are way too quiet. Tanya, we're gonna have to spice this up some. So I don't know if you can see that up there. This is some recent cases. Now, I didn't work these cases, but I wanted to kind of give you a couple of ideas of some cases. I'm going to just kind of go over this quickly of things that occurred in government. I've had some cases recent, but I don't want to share that just because it is local and everybody knows everybody in other governments. So I chose to go outside. So in Milwaukee, they had a city employee who was stealing cash and vehicles. For a period of time. That was a $350,000 loss. They had city of Dubai, Pennsylvania, had a city manager and employee conspire to embezzle over $700,000. And what they did was they funneled the money to an unknown bank account, which then got funneled to a shell company, an LLC, that they had access to. And then they used that to fund their personal lifestyle. There was a city employee in Jackson, Mississippi that overstated some of the invoices to obtain a grant, and I think that was, $54,000? And then we've got a $1.2 million case out of Connecticut that involved check fraud. So, and then I think the other one was a bid rigging case where somebody was getting a kickback for winning certain bids for 1.6 million. What I'll tell you is a corruption fraud piece, you're going to see more of a higher dollar loss there because those are harder to detect and find, quite frankly, because a lot of that's off the books. So, questions? All right. So who's heard of the fraud triangle? Anybody heard of the fraud triangle? No? So Donald Creasy was an academic who decided that, in order to commit fraud, you need these three things. And over the years, I think history and behavior has kind of proven that this is pretty accurate. So those three things include pressure, opportunity, and rationalization, right? So pressure is, I've got to perform. My boss says we're underperforming and my bonus relies on it. So what am I going to do? I'm going to start making the numbers look better, right? I've got pressure because I'm going through a divorce personally, and I don't have any access to money, and I don't know what to do. So where am I going to get the funds from? So things start happening. There's pressures, gambling pressure, addiction issues. These are all types of things that go into everybody's life. Has something going on in our world at some point. And so you just never know how the person that you think would never steal, your best friend, could be engaged and find themselves caught up in something that usually starts off really small with the intention to pay it back. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how over time it gets bigger and bigger and bigger where they can't get out, and then they just keep doing it. Opportunity, how good are your internal controls? How good are they, Carl?
Getting better.
Getting better, okay. So we can exploit. So here's what I will say. The opportunity always presents itself, right? And if it doesn't present itself, people do what, Chief? They find a way to go make the opportunity, create the opportunity, right? So, I always used to think, many years ago, I used to work in retail, and we lock everything up. Anybody ever shop in Best Buy? Years ago, right? You see the cages? You couldn't buy a laptop unless it was in a cage. We'd lock everything up. And then what I realized is, over time, I think the organization and you realize the culture, when you lock everything up, what message does that send not only to your employees, but to the customers? You don't trust anybody, right? So what happens? So people don't feel comfortable. Employees don't want to work for an organization. The culture starts to go down, right? So if you feel like everything is locked up all the time and you have all these internal controls, it impacts your culture. If you lock things up, or if you have all these internal controls, what's the biggest weakness with internal controls? What's the biggest weakness?
The key holder.
I heard somebody over here. People, right? If you have all these internal controls and steps that you have to do, the auditor is going to not like this part of the presentation, just saying, folks. But if you have all these internal controls, I'm not saying that they're not there and they shouldn't be there, but they have to be reasonable internal controls. You don't want to put so many internal controls in place that it's not realistic from a workload standpoint, because as humans, when we're too busy, we're not going to sit there and make sure that we're checking a box every single time because we get busy doing other things, right? And then we start taking shortcuts. So that's the biggest weakness with internal controls. So are they necessary? Yes, but as long as they're realistic. That's what I like to teach and educate folks on. So opportunity will always be there, even if you have good internal controls in place. The ability to rationalize your behavior. How many of you guys this morning hit the alarm and you're like, oh, I got an extra 5 minutes. I'm going to hit snooze. Come on. Nobody wants to admit it. See, Chief? Body language, you're falling. Okay, there you go. So we all rationalize our behavior every day. Somebody that's going to steal has to rationalize their behavior, especially if this is somebody that has some type of ethical moral compass, right? They've got to figure out, well, if I'm going to take this, how do I make this okay? Well, I'll pay it back. Well, I did it one time. You know what? That was pretty easy, and I need a little bit more to get through the next week. So let me just go take another, couple $100, and I'll pay that back. Well, you know what? I'm short again the next week. So, we start going down this path, and then it just becomes a snowball effect. And the more we do something, you become desensitized to it. And the next thing you know, it becomes an everyday habit, right? and then we lose focus of who we are. So these are the types of patterns and things that we see all the time.
Sorry, I'm gonna be that guy who walks in late, they call it rest.
Well, actually, I usually make you do the little teapot. So, anyway, so those are so opportunity, rationalization, and pressure are 3 things needed for a fraud to occur. Go back. So when we talk about the psychological behaviors of fraud, and I've talked a little bit about this already, as far as the deep moral conflict. I can't talk today. I've been studying in trial mode for a case next week, so my brain's been a little bit at this point mush, so I apologize. But the desensitizing, our moral ethical behavior is something that we see, pay attention to with employees. If you know you've got an employee who is somebody who's always really good about making sure things are done right, has a strong moral compass, and then all of a sudden you start seeing them kind of taking shortcuts, or you start seeing them, making some bad behavior, choices that they wouldn't normally make, it's usually that moral compass may be starting to falter a little bit. Quite frankly, I say the ethical barometer in our country keeps going down because where are the any politicians in here? Okay, I mean, let's be real. You look at the politicians, half of them, you don't know what to believe. So then that tone at the top filters down, and then other people start thinking it's okay to act this way. And so that really starts to impact that moral compass. Looking at things like fraud as a coping mechanism, I've got some stresses financially. I'm going through a divorce. I've got a gambling issue. I need to support my gambling habit when I go to the boat. Things like that. So these are all opportunities to that people start to think through when it comes to why they commit fraud. How many of you folks deal with people that are narcissists? Or know any people that are narcissists? I've dubbed this Nobody is? Okay. I was going to ask, that was my next question. How many of you are narcissists? Let's stand up, because you should be up here doing this presentation. Right? So, you get people that have that entitlement sense, feel that they're justified, coming in. Why is this jumping on me? I swear I'm not hitting the button, but it keeps going. All right.
Is your mouse on the tripod?
Thank you. It's my glasses. That would be why. Okay. Having a sense of entitlement that I'm owed something, right? I work hard. I go, I show up every day. This is something that's owed to me. Manipulation. Any of you guys know anybody that's like just amazing manipulators? Right? And you don't even know you're being manipulated until it's too late and you've given away the house and the keys. We're seeing more of those behaviors. Thrill seekers, people that like to go do things just to see if they can get away with it. So when you look at a profile of a narcissist, what are some of the things that you guys see? You can read the slides. What are some profiles of what you would consider a narcissist?
They work in human resources.
They work in human resources. There you go. All right. I like this guy. He's funny. What else?
What else? Like you're going along with that?
Finance department?
Let me interview everybody in HR, and I'll tell you whether or not it's accurate. I haven't done that yet. No. Some profiles of a narcissist. What are some behavior, key things that you would say?
Everything relates to them. Everything relates.
Yes.
Everything happens somehow, either causing a poor effect on them or something. It's all centers around.
Around them, right. They are the world. What else?
They're above the rules.
They're above the rules. That's a big one, right? Because how many times do people that think that, yes, they're out there and it's all about me, but when they truly believe that they could do something and lie about it, if you say that table's red when it's really white, but they believe it's really red, you can't tell them differently, right? And if they go and if they steal something and we say, I didn't steal it, that was Tanya over there that did this. Sorry, Tanya, I had to pick on you, And in their mind, they believe it, so they're above the rules, or that, they justify it. Good, what else?
never take responsibility for their actions.
They don't take responsibilities, right? They like to, it's always somebody else's fault, right? How many of you have ever lived with a narcissist? Nobody wants to admit that. Okay, got it.
His wife isn't here, so. Yeah, it couldn't relax.
You know, it's interesting because I work a lot of cases in family law, and I can't tell you how many times I have a client that has, on one side or the other, and one of the parties has very strong narcissistic tendencies or personality traits. And so they're kind of fun to work with because you start digging into their financials, and they're like, yeah, I didn't do this, and you start digging into their financials, and you have all the evidence, right? I mean, I live in a world of evidence, even though that does really exist, and some people think that that doesn't in this state, but it really does in my world. And so you look at the evidence, and you present the findings, and they're still sitting there saying, yeah, no, that didn't happen, you know? So it's amazing. But they're actually fun because they get a little bit cunning. They try to hide things. So they make the, you know, chasing all the financial shenanigans a lot more fun. Talk about manipulators. They're highly charismatic. They tend to blur the responsibilities and the boundaries, right? Always change the narrative. Good at gaslighting. Anybody know anybody good at gaslighting? And then they create confusion to hide their tracks, right? So they have a tendency to make a lot of smoke over here that isn't, just to throw off any concerns. Now, the thing is, you'll see narcissistic personality traits fall into some of this manipulative behavior. So a lot of these kind of overlap to some degree. There is something out there called the dark triad, which talks about, it's similar to the fraud triangle, and it talks about narcissistic behaviors, antisocial personality behaviors, and Machiavellism. And when you look at all the key different elements of each, there's all some overlap in the different personality traits. And then risk takers, we just know they just like to thrill, right? They go do things because they try to get away with it. They think they can. They want to be able to just prove that they're better than somebody else. And for them, it's a game more than anything else. All right, so emotional red flags. So here's the thing about fraud. It's great to understand a little bit about what's the personality type, what's the psychological makeup, what are some of the fraud schemes, but more importantly, what are the red flags that you folks need to pay attention to every single day? Because this is, if you see it, then we need to figure out what do we do with that information once we identify that something just doesn't feel right, right? So some of the things to look at from the emotional side is pay attention to unexplained mood swings. Somebody that's normally in a great, great upbeat, positive mentality, and all of a sudden they're going through a lot of mood swings. Now, I personally blame some of that at my age on menopause, but I don't know about others. So, and I'm calling myself out on that. So sometimes you'll have people that will have sudden defensiveness or anger issues. Emotional withdrawal from a team. They're usually engaged, and now all of a sudden they're withdrawal, they're kind of isolating themselves. Different red flags to pay attention to. They might have something personally going on. And again, not saying that they're doing anything wrong, these are behavioral red flags to pay attention to because it could lead to something else, right? Anybody familiar with the city of Dixon, Illinois? Right? All the Queen's horses?
Thoroughbred horses.
Yep. Anybody see the movie? Okay. So yes, everybody's familiar? Anybody not? Okay. So real quick on that. So I didn't work this case, but that sure would have been a fun one to work. City of Dixon, Illinois. The city, I don't know if she was a controller, I can't remember at this point. She, I think, was one of the administrators, had set up a bank account or two that the city didn't know about, and was concealing and funneling money to this bank account to the tune of $53 million over a 19-year period, and funded her thoroughbred horse farm and horse activity. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me correct, she was probably making less than $100,000 a year. So I'm not sure where the two correlate. So you think there are any red flags that might have been going off there over a period of time? Anybody know how she got caught?
She had a backup. A lady, she took vacation and had to take some time off.
Yep. She took vacation, somebody stepped in, and what happened?
going through the mail and the records and
What'd they find?
I don't remember. Was it bank statement?
Yep, they found a bank statement. They're like, hey, we don't have an account here. And that's what prompted an FBI investigation. So $53 million, small amount of money, folks. So people that avoid vacations, that's a huge red flag. Somebody that's the first one in, last one out is another red flag. Exclusive vendor relationships where there's really tight controls or, they're very territorial. They don't want anybody else to have that relationship with that vendor is something to pay attention to. I always throw this up there, but, let's be real. At some point, a lot of people have financial difficulties. It happens. It just depends on the economy, depends on life circumstances. But it could be a red flag. You see somebody driving up in a nice, Porsche that's only making about $70,000. You have to wonder who passed away that they just got a nice inheritance, if that even happened. I had a case that actually, that was their justification for driving up for this nice vehicle, is they got this inheritance. And when we did the investigation, there was no inheritance. Needless to say, the inheritance that they received was from their company that they work for. So, so question those things. You want to see the incongruence between somebody's lifestyle and what reasonably they would be able to afford, right? I mean, government, let's be real, doesn't always pay the best. So a lot of times if you see people living and having all these elaborate types of vacation homes and things like that, there could be, unless you have a significant other or a spouse that makes really good money, that's something to pay attention to. It may lead to other things. Refuses to delegate tasks, like to cover up mistakes. You guys know anybody that opposes cross-training? I don't want to have anybody be cross-trained so that, I can control my work environment. These are all things to pay attention to. Lifestyle changes, we kind of talked a little bit about this, not supported by salary, and visible disconnect between income and spending. Somebody that's spending a lot more money than what they can afford. I had a case where, actually this was an HR person, so sorry guys. They're gonna be like, we're not having you back again. A couple years ago, where the HR manager also was the accounts payable person, kind of wore multiple hats. And this wasn't a government entity, but it was a senior living facility. And they started using the company credit card for a lot of their personal expenditures. And what they would do is they'd go buy Walmart gift cards or other gift cards. And then when the statements came in, they actually started using some type of PDF manipulator and took the items off of the statement. And what was interesting, they weren't very creative when they did it. You could see that there should have been something on that statement, but it wasn't there, right? And then they would turn it in. They had to have 2 signatures on all checks, so they turned it over to the executive director for that facility. They signed the check, and then the executive director had the documentation, so they thought, and signed that check. $750,000 later, right? And that was over a 3-year period, very short period of time. So when you look at some of this, and she would go on vacations all the time. She and the executive director would go on vacations, and she was always spending money. And, the executive director just looked away thinking, well, I just thought, maybe she had, or her spouse or husband had money and things like that. So she rationalized that away instead of paying attention to the various red flags. So that's what I talked about earlier, is take the blinders off. Take a second to just kind of pay attention to what's going on and just not assume. Because when we look at all of the fraud, and we talk about the culture, right, that impacts, when you have who in here had fraud? A couple of you guys had dealt with fraud in the workplace. Raise your hands again. Okay. What was the culture like in an organization when it was going on? Tense? Yeah. What did you experience?
Well, I came afterwards for, Jeff would know this too, money stolen from courts, but I think she had too much control of money coming in, money going out. So when I came here, there was separation of duties, and we had to do a lot of the court bank recs and receipts and all of that just to separate that.
So you came in after. But as far as the culture goes, when you talk about tense, Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it was just, well, I was one of the ones that had to help investigate and give things, like, money-wise. It was at a school, and it was one of their financial administrators for that school. She didn't deposit the extracurricular monies, the registration funds. She basically took it all. And they didn't find out till she was gone. And then they noticed there was 0 deposits made except for like for the cafeteria, the lunch money,
Okay.
and that, because she couldn't do anything with that. But it was just like all of a sudden, it's like we all felt like we were under a microscope because, well, if she could do it, you could do it, things like that.
Yeah.
So we had to go back and I had to audit like my last 4 years of things so they could estimate how much she took and everything too.
What was the total, out of curiosity?
It was over 50,000 over 3-4 years, which
Okay.
for a school is pretty much. But
The culture is, you know, if you walk into an office building or a building and you just feel like it's really heavy, you know, when you have fraud going on and there's things, because what does it do? It makes usually somebody that's very controlling, their behavior changes, that personality may start impacting how they treat others in the workforce, could create a hostile work environment situation, could create a whole myriad of issues within a workforce, and it tanks the culture, right? Where maybe the culture might have otherwise been really positive. I always say if a company has a strong organizational culture, like really good culture where people have a harder time rationalizing stealing from that organization, your opportunity for theft and fraud is going to be much lower. And if something does happen, you're going to catch it sooner and a dollar amount is going to be lower. If you walk into an organization and they have a poor company culture, it's almost ripe, and I would venture to say probably something's going on, and that's those losses are generally a lot higher. So culture plays a huge place in fraud prevention, quite frankly. The other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about is when you sit here and you see and if you identify something that looks out of character, doesn't seem right, you start seeing patterns of behaviors that are changing. Well, what do you do? Do you say anything? Do you ignore it? What do you do? I mean, is there a hotline here? I don't know. You know, I should have asked that. Is there a hotline? I mean, do you notify a supervisor? Do you confront the person? What do you guys do? What should you do?
I would think see something, say something.
See something, say something. But how many of you would? Right? How many of you work for somebody that you're afraid that if I say something, there's going to be backlash on me? Right? If I used to work in government. I mean, I used to wear the uniform. You know, it's a different. You know, you have superiors. You have different people you report to, and if you see a superior doing something, what do? You know, if I say something, I'm going to lose my job. So there's that fear of retaliation. You know, I think that's the hardest thing that I deal with when trying to have, you know, just doing these fraud presentations and just everyday life is, let's be realistic. It's not easy to come forward when there's something going on, because I have to think about my family. I have to worry about, am I going to lose my job because I'm trying to do the right thing. But if you don't do the right thing, then what could happen? If the fraud continues, what could happen? Could hurt everybody. How?
You used to lose your job because you didn't do your job like you're a manager or oversee people and you see it but you don't say nothing.
Right, that you could.
Be an effective manager.
And I think we had a situation like that, yeah, in a past world, you know, that Tanya and I had dealt with. Was just that, you know, somebody didn't bother to come forward and turned a blind eye, and unfortunately you could lose a job. You know, the city's not going to go bankrupt, at least you'd hope not, right? I might see this more in the business side, but one of the things that I see a lot of times, you could have layoffs. People don't think about that. If there's so much fraud, the city can't afford to continue to pay your payroll. It's going to impact and trickle down to you. So, you know, these are things that I just want to create an awareness of, because I don't think a lot of people associate that together. They figure out, it's not my money, it's, you know, public funds, it's this, it's that, so I don't need to worry about it. I'm over here collecting my paycheck. But if they're stealing from government, guess what, folks? It is our money, especially if you live in the city, because we're the ones paying the bill, right? And all the money's coming in. So things like that to just keep in mind. It does impact you. So it's always better to make sure you communicate to a supervisor, HR, the hotline. I don't know, where is the hotline, if you want to talk to that for a second?
It's an anonymous hotline. We've never had anyone call in, though, I don't think, but it's Lighthouse. It's a service.
Yep, I'm familiar with Lighthouse. Okay. Does everybody know that a hotline even exists? Okay. Does everybody know what the number is or how to reach out? So, and if you can report anonymously, it's better to say something than to ignore any of the red flags. So, all right. I kind of passed a few of the last couple of slides and surmised it just for time purposes. But any questions, folks, on any of that? I mean, I know it's kind of pretty high, high level stuff. I could get into a whole lot of case studies, but I'm not even sure what time we have right now. So, and everybody looks like you're ready to get back to work. All right. Okay. So if I can answer any questions, happy to stay a few minutes. But just be vigilant, be aware. Last thing I would leave you with is, would you want somebody coming into your home, helping themselves to your wallet, your TV, your household items, right? We have to be good stewards when we go into our workforce in our workplace to do the same thing. So.
Somebody said they're called kids.
Well, that's true. That is very true. All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate your time.